Louise Chatterton, thank you for being here.
Pleasure.
Can you share a time when you changed a long-held belief and what influenced that change?
Yes, I'll share two because one is quite serious, and then I'll finish with something more light-hearted. So, without giving any specifics, a long time ago, years and years ago, in my early adulthood, there was quite a high-profile criminal trial, and it was publicized a lot. And I'm not going to say exactly what it was. It wasn't O.J. Simpson, I will say that. But I formed quite a strong belief that the accused was guilty of what being accused of. And I felt very strongly about it. And I think it was quite emotionally driven at the time. That was years and years ago. The verdict was more nuanced. There have been developments since. I won't go into it. But recently, last few years, I stumbled across an article about it, as happens on scrolling online. And I looked into it again a little bit. And I formed completely the opposite belief. I believe entirely that this person is innocent. And I think, although I'm not sharing specifics, what's very interesting is I realised that I formed that initial belief on emotion and feeling and a lot of stuff in the press that was probably quite manipulative about the person involved. And I was younger, and this is me because I don't think this is all young people at all, but I was quite naive and I had quite a storybook version of the world where I thought that there are good people, there are bad people, and good people do good things and bad people do bad things. And now I understand that life is far more complicated and nuanced, and I just feel that I'd gone with emotion and gone with a simplistic view of how this person must have done it. But now, looking at circumstantial evidence, looking at the actual facts involved, it seems clear to me that they didn't. So there's an example of where I really changed what I believed. And then the lighter hearted thing is I think I was doing philosophy in my head for years as a child without realizing. And I think lots of children are. And from a young age, I'd formed the belief that water isn't wet. And I would talk about it to people. I would say that water just makes other things wet. Water isn't wet if you really think about it. A toaster makes other things toasted, but it's not toasted itself. I would use those kind of examples. And I would actually be both furious and joyous when somebody said, as you often hear, and I've heard people use a rhetorical question, is water wet? To mean it's obvious, that something is obvious. Well, I would always think, no, you're wrong. That's not obvious. It's not wet. And then as I realised I was doing philosophy and I did a philosophy degree, I just held on to this. I've thought about it and other people don't think about it and it's not wet. And then a few years ago, again, my husband said, you're wrong about that. And it was a rug being pulled beneath feet there. And he just put forward a very simple argument. He said that water makes the things it touches wet. Water molecules touch other water molecules, therefore water is wet. And it certainly shifted my firm belief that water is not wet, but I'm not entirely sure how far it shifted it. And I probably need to do more philosophical work on it. But it was quite a moment. But again, similar to the first example, it was reasons, logic, critical thinking, argument, as opposed to just feeling that convinced me otherwise.
Are there any beliefs you feel you will never abandon and why?
Yeah, there are probably a few. The one I'll share, it's really nice to be asked to share a belief because when we facilitate in schools, obviously we don't share our philosophical position on things. We don't share what we think. We're enabling others to share what they think. So I thought, should I share this? But I will because I think it aligns with what we do in schools. So I will. I have a very strong belief I can't imagine changing. And it's formed in two parts. So the first is a claim about how the world is. And that's this idea that I believe that when children are born into the world, they have absolutely no control over the circumstances into which they're born. So they've no control, no say in the parents they're born to, the geographical location, the financial situation, whether they're born somewhere currently very stable infrastructure, whether they're born in a war zone, and even things like whether they are going to be a child who finds learning to read quite easy or whether they struggle with it. It's the lottery of life. That's what I see as the lottery of life. These things, all of us being thrown into the world with absolutely no say over the circumstances that we're being thrown into. And I've imagined responses to that, but I've never heard really responses to that. But I've imagined objections and how I might argue against those. That's really the first bit. The main bit of the belief is that this, what I see as a fact, confers responsibility onto all members of society for that child, so therefore for all children. Now, how that plays out practically I don't know. I shift around, I change my mind on. But I cannot shake the feeling that because, as I see it, it's a lottery where you're born into, that all members of society have responsibility towards you. And yeah, as I say, I don't know whether that means there are different levels of responsibility, whether I have more of a responsibility towards children on my doorstep than children miles away, like the Peter Singer proximity stuff. I don't know whether, as someone who goes into schools, I have more responsibility than someone who has no part in children's lives at all, and how that plays out in terms of political decisions, education systems. I don't know, because I changed that, but I never changed that foundational belief on which everything else rests. And what's interesting is actually that leap from the life's a lottery where you're born to that means that we all have this responsibility towards you. That's just a leap that, well, philosophers have scratched their head over for ages. How do you get an ought from an is? How do you make normative claims from descriptive ones? But I still have this feeling that my belief is correct there, and I can't always explain why. And that kind of strengthens it in many ways. So there we are. And the reason I feel I can share that is it doesn't tie me to any political colours, because I just use it as a cornerstone of what I believe. And I look at the situation and decide what that means I need to do politically, or where I need to be. And that might shift with times and with policies. And yeah, so there we go. But I've heard loads of objections to that second bit. None have yet convinced me that I'm wrong.
Our next question is, what does it mean to disagree well?
I think it's a difficult thing to do. And I think I've thought about this. I'll put it into 4 points, 4 things you could do to help you disagree well. They're all very important. The first is to listen well. It is so easy when you're entering into disagreement with someone to just assume what their argument is, to assume what their reasons are, and to leap in. But you really have to listen to what they're saying. By reasons, I mean the justification they are giving for their answer, because that can vary and change and can be subtly different from what you're imagining, or it can be really quite different from what you're imagining. But really, the disagreement is in the reasons. So ignore the conclusion and listen to the reasons, and then whether they lead towards what they say. But always listen very, very well. And the second point is, as I've just referenced, actually focus on the reasons. The reasons are the important things, the premises, the arguments that lead to the disagreement, because often you hear people are just talking at cross purposes with each other. They're talking across each other. They're not actually dissecting each other's reasons for their claims. And third is to enter into a spirit of inquiry. I think we don't do enough in schools or in society as a whole. So imagine there's somebody who's saying A is B, and there's someone else who's saying A isn't B. Whatever it's about, they're saying A is B and the other person is saying A isn't B, and they're disagreeing. If you think to enter into a spirit of inquiry, you need to think that issue, whether there's a fact that resolves the issue, whether there's a practical solution, whether there's a useful answer, or whether it is just purely preference and there's no answer, it's outside of yourself. So rather than thinking that you're having this personal disagreement with somebody, think of whether A is B or not as being outside of both of you, and together you're collaborating in an inquiry to try and find the truth, the practical answer, the useful answer, or whether there is an answer. And if you do that, you become co-inquirers on something that's different from you, and it doesn't feel so personal. And then if it doesn't feel so personal, you don't fall into the pitfalls of feeling very angry and then not disagreeing well, disagreeing badly. So that's what I would say. Keep in mind that this is outside of yourself. Now, obviously, sometimes the conclusion to whether A is B or A isn't B could be something incredibly personal to the person involved. But I think if you're staying calm, you're listening well and charitably and with respect, and you're focusing on reasons, then that shouldn't feel so bad. And that should be something that can still be done. Potentially, maybe in some cases, it's not something that you want to continue to disagree about, and you can just leave it. But yeah, I think in most cases it's something outside of yourself, and we should just be recognizing that. And that's what I mean by the spirit of inquiry, co-inquirers rather than people just going at each other about something. And then that's the last point. Number 4 is just be prepared to be wrong, or be prepared to change your mind because better reasons for a different answer have come along. It's funny how the stigma of being incorrect or changing your mind, the fact that it's seen as something so negative in society is just such a shame, because I think it's a great intellectual virtue to say, actually, I've found more reasons and a different idea, and this is better, and therefore I'm changing my mind. And particularly in politicians, it's seen as such a huge weakness. The second there's a U-turn, the press jump on it. And I do understand that they need to be quite well informed before they make decisions. They're in a bit of a different situation from the rest of us, but still, I think the narrative around changing your mind, I mean, it's just not a weakness. So be prepared to be wrong, or be prepared to change your answer always, without feeling personally disrupted by that. That's basically it. So the 4 things: listen well, focus on reasons, enter into this spirit of inquiry where the thing you're inquiring about is outside of yourselves and you're doing it together collaboratively, and be prepared to be wrong or to change your answer.
And finally, how can schools and universities promote good disagreement?
Have philosophy sessions with the Philosophy Foundation. I think having that space every week where this is exactly the stuff that we are doing, it would be brilliant. But it's incredibly hard for schools to find the time, for schools to find that space in busy curriculum demands, etc. So I think there are ways, if you can't do that, there are ways to do it. Embed it in some sense through the other lessons on the curriculum. So the same stuff I've said, if somebody, so say there is a right answer and the teacher's looking for it in the classroom, and somebody puts their hand up and gives the wrong answer, if there's time, and this is a big if for teachers, you say, no, but why do you think that? Or just why do you think that? And listen for the reason for how they've got to the wrong answer. And if there's another wrong answer, listen to that person's reason. And then if there's a right answer comes from somebody, just check their reason, because they might be right for a reason that actually doesn't make sense. They might be partially right, but the reason isn't what shouldn't have, the reasoning was wrong, which is a wrong answer, really. So remember why, just ask why and listen. And even if it's something so obvious as 2 + 2 = 4, and somebody has said 2 + 2 = 5, if you've got time to just assess how they've got to that, I think that would help foster disagreement. Also, you can have inquiry time, even if it's just 5 minutes, on a nice juicy philosophical question or imaginative question, 5 minutes on the carpet, 5 minutes in the classroom, where maybe there's a ball that comes out and you pass it around as people give their answers, and that's a set inquiry time. Even just 5 minutes twice a week, I think, would help. And just reminding them it's okay to be wrong or to change your mind, all the things I've said already, really. And that even though we use language like they are disagreeing with each other, they're actually disagreeing with each other's ideas, not with each other. So it doesn't need to become this personal thing. It's very sweet when you're in a class that's actually got a great camaraderie and a great vibe, and they obviously have all been together more or less since reception, and they're in the juniors, they're doing all this great philosophy. Sometimes they're the classes that when there's a disagreement, they'll all go, oh, burn, and then someone will agree and they'll go, yeah, and it becomes like this boxing ring, which is, it shows they're feeling comfortable and psychologically safe to do that. But that's when I will say to the older years, this isn't what it's about. You're not disagreeing with each other, you're disagreeing with each other's ideas. And to disagree with someone is a mark of great respect towards them. You are showing that you've taken the time to listen to their idea, and you want to engage with their idea and discuss it with them, and that's a lovely thing. So I do some transparent stuff there, which I think teachers, particularly with older groups, late primary school years and onwards, can really explain to them, and I think that's useful to do it in schools as well. I mean, schools are good with respect, and they're good with agreeing and disagreeing respectfully, I think. And it's interesting, my daughter, a few years ago, when she was in one of the last years of primary school, she had the opportunity with a few other students to the plan was that they would spend some time with a prominent UK politician at the time and be able to ask some questions to them. And they all had to go home and come up with a question. And I honestly can't remember how much I helped my daughter, but I remember feeling very proud that she'd got to this question. So probably helped a bit, or I can't remember. But the question she had was, why are we told to listen to each other and treat each other with respect in the classroom, but every time the news is on and Parliament is on, everybody is shouting at each other? And I thought that was a brilliant question, and I was excited about this. But unfortunately, the whole event fell through, and so she didn't end up meeting that person and being able to put that to them. But I think that we see so many bad examples, don't we, or good examples of bad disagreement in adults and in the public sphere, in spats online, in our very own Parliament, in the House of Commons. We're seeing terrible behaviour when it comes to disagreement, and schools are generally doing a good job in trying to foster a far more tolerant and healthy space for respectful disagreement. And something goes wrong into adulthood, and I think we need to work on that.